Eleanor Roosevelt had this great quote. She said that poor minds talk about other people, average minds talk about events, but great minds, they talk about ideas. Yeah, of course I believe in LGBT rights. Of course I believe in women's rights. Of course I believe in minority rights. You know why? Because they're all individual rights. We all have rights as individuals. General Smedley Butler, one of the most decorated American soldiers in all of history, wrote an entire book called War is a Racket. The value of the dollar has gone down by over 96% in the last 100 years. The Second Amendment is not there so that we can go outside and hunt rabbits. It's there to keep us free. And actually, I would argue that if anyone needs the Second Amendment, it's minorities. Historically, unarmed minorities fare the worst in all of history. Those are the genocides we all hear about. Look, violence is wrong, all right? Whether it's cops or whether it's riots, it's unacceptable in a civilized society. You know what really gets me is everyone knows that the largest polluter on Earth is the U.S. government. All right. So how are they the ones going to solve the problem? You know what's insane is we have the largest prison population in the entire world, and over half of them are for non-violent crimes. Welcome to the Take On Everything podcast.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the podcast. Welcome to the show. As always, your host, James Cook, and this is the Take On Everything. So, I can't believe it's November already. This is insane. I don't think I've talked about really the election or anything, even really along those lines. And here we are, just a couple of days away. It is, I'm recording this Sunday night, November 1st. It is a little chilly, as you can see. I've got my sweater on. But I wanted to do a little pre-election episode. After the election, I want to get back to doing issues, talking about a little bit more theoretical and historical episodes and those types of things. I'm much more interested in that. But elections come around once every 4 years, the presidential election anyway, and this one has been interesting, frustrating, but interesting at the same time. I just want to go a little bit of an overview of just my thoughts. You know, nothing too complicated, nothing too statistically relevant, but just, you know, my thought process through all this. I mean, I think most people can at least see or appreciate how bad I feel like both of the candidates are. It's kind of just really disappointing in a way. Unexpected, not really, but just disappointing that democracy is supposed to be this great equalizer and this voice of the people, and yet this is kind of what we get to choose from, which is also, again, not really a surprise that most people don't vote. The biggest voting bloc just chooses not to vote. Independents are just non-voters. People just either can't stomach doing it, or just don't want to, or don't care, and that's the majority of Americans. So it really comes down to mid 20% of voters, of Americans that actually choose the president that, kind of rules over everybody else. It's kind of a crazy system if you think about it. I think the first time I realized that, I was actually really shocked. I'm like, it's like 20-some% of the people get to tell everyone else what to do, and that's okay. But anyway, so let's do a little bit of an overview of the candidates. We'll talk about their policies, talk about some of the dumb things people say about them, and then just, my thoughts about it. So we'll start with the President Donald Trump. Elected in 2016. His major platform promises, included, some immigration issues, talking about building a wall, slowing down immigration, talked about like trade wars, trying to get more fair trade deals and, stop China from manipulating their currency and hurting our exports and just a general populism and nationalism, kind of speaking to the American people as if it's kind of like a calling to like American greatness, American exceptionalism, touching on kind of the patriotic nerve that Americans have and kind of really trying to draw on that. America is great. Actually, I thought his 2016 campaign slogan was wonderful, actually, just from a political standpoint, Make America Great Again. It kind of touched on it touched on a feeling that I think most Americans have is that, we've been in a better spot before, or that there's a little something wrong, or there are things that we could do better, but nobody could quite put their finger on exactly what those things were. And honestly, that's because it's difficult. I think a lot of people have different things that they're facing. So it's like everyone kind of has this feeling, and we're not all facing the same problems, but we all kind of feel like there's something wrong. Whether you're part of a minority community or whether, you are, part of part of the economy that's a little bit depressed. Talking about, so Donald Trump really focused on manufacturing jobs and got, in agriculture and these traditional, the blue collar workers. So he kind of touched on that and kind of solidified that base. Some of the things, and energy independence, that was his big thing. And that's actually something he has done. How he's done it has been a series of interesting policies, but those are kind of the main things that he ran on. There's a lot of other things that he ran on and promised and really never followed through on at all. Just, typical politician stuff. They'll promise you 100 things and they might come up with 5. But what are some of the things that he's actually done? One of the things was the trade deals. He's pulled out of or rewritten just about every trade deal that we have. Talking about, NAFTA, the TPP, individual trade setups with other countries like China. So he's actually done, those things. And so that's one of his accomplishments. And that's one of the things that he's very proud of. That's what he considers an accomplishment. I think it's, personally, I'll get into that later. He has actually made America energy independent, which I understand the argument from, national defense type of aspect is relying on, critical supplies and resources from, foreign countries might not be the smartest thing. But I mean, that's kind of why we have an oil reserve or whatever. But so he was able to do that through fracking subsidies and oil subsidies and giving, this is not a new practice. This is not something that Donald Trump specifically came up with as far as, giving away federal lands or giving artificially cheap contracts to fracking or oil companies. But it's something that he's definitely expanded. And so, yeah, America is actually energy independent, as in we produce just about all of the oil that we use. This is through a series of accounting tricks and kind of price fixing and subsidies to oil companies, but he actually did get that done. So he can consider that an accomplishment as far as following through on some of the things he said, as well as some, rearranging some of the trade deals and things. So what are some of the things he's talking about, going forward? So not only that, he's building on the trade, bringing back jobs. Through his presidency, we've actually accelerated the loss of manufacturing jobs and exports, even worse than under Obama and Bush, who he reprimanded. His policies have actually had the opposite effect, where the trade deficit is absolutely enormous. And manufacturing is plummeting, and the Made in America things, the Made in America policies we're almost having the opposite effect. Yet he is running on that he is, he's winning that war. He hasn't quite won it yet, but he will deliver that in his second term. Another thing that he's running on is, continuing lower taxes. Now, this does help with a contrast with Biden, who says explicitly that he wants to raise taxes. So Trump was able to lower taxes in his first term, and Biden wants to basically raise them back up. So talking about corporate taxes, which I think went from, 35% to low 20s. I can't remember off the top of my head. But it actually brought the U.S. more in line with European corporate taxes and those types of things. So whether Trump is actually going to look to lower taxes again if he gets reelected, I am not sure. He hasn't quite touched on that. He says things. That's the problem with both Joe Biden and Donald Trump is if you actually look on their platform and policy websites, there's not a lot of concrete anything on there. It's a lot of platitudes. It's a lot of make America great again, build back better, which is, by the way, a terrible slogan. Obama's was wonderful, and Trump's in 2016 was wonderful, but Biden's build back better is just bad. And yeah, Donald Trump's this year is pretty awful as well. Keep America great is like, he hasn't delivered on a lot of this stuff, and two, we're in a much worse position now than we were in 2015, 2016. Anyways, back to what he's looking forward to on the 2020 potential of a second term. Again, keeping with the nationalism and the populism, he is again touching on that patriotic vein that the United States citizens have. He wants to take. He wants to utilize, the federal government already does have full control over public education, but he wants to utilize that to teach a pro-America, what he calls a pro-America curriculum to teach kids patriotism and to kind of force the Pledge of Allegiance and those types of things on kids. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, whether you like it or not. I think that precedent is interesting. And then his COVID response, he has made a point to kind of contrast himself with Joe Biden, which is smart politically, because we're going to go over this later, but there's not a ton of actual policy difference between the two of them. There's a lot of rhetorical difference, but there's not a ton of policy difference, with the exception of COVID, which again there's not a huge difference, but it's probably the biggest difference in their policies is their COVID response. Trump did initially shut the economy down, flatten the curve. He did all that. Now he's saying, reopen, but he's not doing any kind of like federal mandates at all. Whereas Biden explicitly said that he would do federal mask mandates and potential further shutdowns and those types of things, kind of a little bit more for the long haul. So those are the key policy issues that I can see that actually are laid out by Trump. Again, there's so many platitudes and other things that he says that you don't know what that means. And even if you did know what that means, like what happened in 2015 to 2016, he changes his mind left and right. You can't pin him down for anything. I heard a comedian one time, he said, Donald Trump could one day, his wall is his thing. And then, 2 days later, he could come out and just be like, well, I never said anything about a wall. What wall? People are like, okay, I guess we're not doing a wall. Which I haven't heard him say anything about a wall lately. I think he's done a little bit. Actually, he's built less of a wall than Obama did. And I think he's called it a win. I don't think Mexico paid for any of it. So it's really hard to pin down what his agenda is. He says, I'm going to bring jobs back. I'm going to win the trade war. I'm going to do all these things. But again, it's hard to see what exactly that means. So I'm going off of basically what has happened over the last couple of years, and then what that looks like compared to the rhetoric that he's using. So I'm assuming continued protectionist tariffs, continued trade wars, pulling out of international agreements and alliances like NATO, and generally kind of like a decentralization from the world scale with kind of an America First policy is kind of how people that support Trump sum that up, which I think is a fair representation. So let's go over some dumb arguments against Trump, like things that people say that I can't. I get what you're saying, but I don't quite see it the way you do. So there are plenty of Republicans that say that Trump there is a fiscal conservative compared to Joe Biden. That he actually Trump ran on saying that he is going to balance the budget immediately and eliminate the debt in 4 years, which was a bold claim. I don't think there's been a fair amount of Republicans that I've talked to that actually don't know the actual difference between the deficit and the debt. I'm going to chalk that one up to I don't think Trump knows the difference between the deficit and the debt, or didn't when he ran, because making that kind of claim is just insane. I'm like, I mean, if you can do it, awesome. But there's no way you can do that. Like, even if all of the money that you took in taxes, you used all of that to pay down the debt and didn't spend anything on governmental services, you wouldn't be able to do that in 4 years. It's absolutely impossible. So I think he said that without understanding the difference, and then maybe found out the difference later, and then decided to just kind of say screw it and spend more money every single year as president, spend more money than any year under Obama, who he criticized for overspending. So Trump is not a fiscal conservative, and conservatives will make the argument that, well, he is more of a fiscal conservative than Biden is, and I find that argument a little bit fallacious, just because Biden was vice president under Obama, and they spent less than Trump did, and actually reduced the tricky with the deficit versus the debt. They actually reduced the deficit 3 out of 8 years under Obama, whereas Trump has every single year increased the deficit and the debt. The other thing that I hear a lot of Democrats and progressives say is that Trump is anti-gay. I really don't think that's the case, and here's why. Trump has been in office for almost 4 years. He has not done anything against gay people, as far as gay marriage, as far as really restricting things. I know he's restricted some discrimination protections for LGBT, mostly focusing on trans individuals. But I don't know of any. There's an argument there. I think there's a legal distinction there that makes. I read this article that Trump is, withdrawn 100 and some provisions that protect the LGBT community, and every single one of them has to do with some kind of anti-discrimination thing. And maybe I'll do an episode about that, in the next couple of weeks. I think it's an interesting topic. It's like, what does you call something anti-discrimination, but if you actually read the lettering of the law, it's kind of really up for debate and extremely vague. So it's hard to say that that is actually a detriment for the LGBT community. I think it's been used as kind of like a buzz thing, like Trump is anti-LGBT and he's going to repeal gay marriage and all this stuff. He may be anti-LGBT as far as some of the trans issues is possible. I think that's a good discussion to have. I think it would be interesting. I don't particularly see it, but I need to do a little bit more research on it. But as far as the anti-gay thing, there's no he's been in office for this long. He's never even talked about gay marriage. He was actually, Obama and Biden both were against gay marriage when they were senators and voted against it. Joe Biden actually voted against it twice. So if you're looking at records, I can't say that Trump is anti-gay. I would need more proof. I'm not a fan of Trump, but I think it's a dumb argument to make, especially given records that are right in front of you. If you want to do compared to Joe Biden has an established record against gay people. Trump, potentially could have said some insensitive things, and I don't know that he said anything specifically against gay people. I think he's made some insensitive remarks against trans people, but specifically gay people, no. And he said that he would not pursue any kind of getting rid of gay marriage. I know that's what people are worried about with Amy Coney Barrett. But as far as Trump's record, I haven't seen any anti-gay specific policies. And again, maybe we can do an issue based on trans issues, or an episode based on trans issues, but I can't see the gay thing. I don't think that Trump is the most anti-immigration president that we've ever had. For the sheer fact that he's deported fewer people than Obama has. Obama and Biden, that administration. He's deported fewer people than Bush has. So he talks a big game, and I think his rhetoric is a little insensitive or disturbing at times, depending on the particular instance and situation. I do think he has a lot of things that is taken out of context, but I do also think there's plenty of things that are in context that are particularly insensitive. But I think aside from his rhetoric, I don't think that he is the most anti-immigration. He definitely talks that way. But again, his actions, though, he hasn't deported nearly as many people as previous presidents have. And in fact, his immigration policy is an exact continuation of previous administrations. He just talks about it more. You never heard about Obama's separation of kids at the border. You never heard of the cages, the ICE detention facilities that a lot of the illegal immigrants end up in. It's been continuing for years before Trump became in office, and it just kind of was almost like an administrative continuation, and now we're talking about it. So I don't like his immigration policy, but I don't think it's worse than many other presidents and administrations in recent history. For the same reason, I don't think Trump is the most racist president ever. I do think he said some really insensitive things. I do think that he probably could be better on race. But again, if you're talking about records, I do think he kind of failed the Black Lives Matter movement. But then again, it kind of devolved really quickly. I think early on, he could have said some more reconciliatory things about it and maybe met with some leaders and addressed some grievances. But again, there have been so many other presidents that are downright awful on race relations. So I don't buy into that Trump is the most racist. I think he is racist, but I don't think he's the most racist president we've ever had. I think that's stupid to make that argument. I also think that that it kind of does an injustice to history and an injustice to some of the actual racist politicians. So the ones that actually acted on it and physically, impacted the minority communities. I think that kind of does a disservice to history and understanding and being able to rationally analyze things. And last dumb argument, I think, again, people I hear about Trump is that I don't think he's responsible for all of the COVID deaths. I think he was very delayed in his response. But I also think that a lot of it was administrative functions. Like, that's what happens when you have this enormous, bureaucratic, bloated government. I think that the response is slow. I think that his response compared to Obama's and Biden's H1N1 response is actually fairly similar. I think that regardless of who was president, we would probably have a similar death rate as we do now and a similar case rate. I think there's a lot of manipulations of the numbers, not as in they're false, but misrepresentation of what the numbers mean and how those numbers are interpreted and how, because if anyone's taken a statistics class, you know how tricky reporting those numbers can be. You can change one word and it changes the entire perception of the data you're representing. I think that's what's going on. I think COVID's been politicized, and I think that depending on who you listen to, like if you listen to Donald Trump, he saved, 3.5 million lives because early on, when people wanted to make Trump look bad, they said that Trump's response was going to kill 3.5 million people, and since only 220,000 people have died, therefore Trump has saved 3.2 million. You see what I'm getting at? Is it's kind of like you can misrepresent the facts to make your agenda sound good, because it's been politicized. But I think the outcomes would have been fairly similar. Honestly, I don't think he handled COVID very well. I don't think Biden would have handled COVID very well. I don't think Hillary would have handled COVID very well because, well, we actually saw the COVID response under the Obama administration, which included both Biden and Hillary, and it was, it was the H1N1, response, and it was kind of subpar. So no, I don't think they're all. He's responsible for all of them. I think there's plenty of blame to go around. And I also think that depending on what statistics you looked at early on, again, you can make the argument that he's saved, 3 million lives or that he's responsible for 200,000. But I think both of those arguments are dishonest, and I don't think that they're quite fair. So that's a little overview of Trump. Let's look at Biden. So again, kind of I mentioned this before, Biden's platform is really hard to pin down. He says a lot of these platitudes. He is a real politician, as in he's been around for forever. He's been on both sides of just about every issue that you could possibly take a stand on, and he's voted on polar opposites, whether it's gay marriage, he's voted against twice, and then now he supports it, whether it's crime, everyone knows, and I think the Democrats are sick of hearing about the 94 crime bill, but I think they're sick of hearing about it because you can't defend it. It's impossible to defend. It is a horrific piece of legislation. I think that his hardline stance on, being tough on crime in the mid-90s, not just the crime bill, but the overall increasing of, funding for prison contracts and increasing the prison population in general, making very derogatory comments about people. It was him, and it was Hillary, and it was Bill Clinton that kind of just really dehumanized drug users specifically, and it was kind of the be tough on crime rather than treat it like a health concern. Whereas now he is much, he says he's much softer on it and would rather treat some things like health considerations, but he's not for repealing any of the drug laws or repealing any of the tough on crime stuff. It's kind of like he's on both sides of every single issue. Both Trump and Biden are big spenders. The response to COVID, as far as the economic response, is plenty of stimulus. Actually, the Democrats and Republicans are fighting over who can have the biggest and best stimulus. Trump said as soon as the election is over, he's going to have the biggest stimulus ever. And then Biden's like, no, we're going to outdo your stimulus. And it's just kind of like, okay, so they agree on that piece. Biden does want to increase taxes, which is, again, there's a few policy differences that are actual policy differences between Trump and Biden. But even those, it's like percentages. It's like they both agree that keeping relatively high taxes is good, yet Biden wants several percentages higher than Trump, and Trump wants several percentages lower. And that's kind of the divide. But in this political climate, that is a serious actual difference. Another actual difference between the two is Biden's energy plan. Trump's was energy independence and kind of a subsidies of the fracking and oil industries. But Biden's is... So Trump pushed him on the Green New Deal in, I think it was the first debate. And Biden said he supported it and then said that he didn't support it. So it was really, really unclear whether he supported it or not. So I went to his website, as I did with a lot of these things, trying to nail something down, which is, again, pretty difficult. He does actually support the Green New Deal on his website, which is a significant difference as far as Trump, subsidizes oil and fracking. Biden would like to subsidize other green energies, non-nuclear, but, wind and solar. So that's a fairly substantial difference. Biden is pro, he wants to reinstate the TPP and NAFTA in their original forms and not their rewritten forms. And the last actual difference is Biden would like to expand gun background checks. Whereas Trump supported that before he was president, when he was a Democrat, but now says he doesn't support that. Interesting note, though, Trump has actually overseen or directly used executive orders to pass more gun legislation than even Obama's administration did. But his rhetoric is that he does not support expanded background checks or additional gun regulations, whereas Biden does. So what are some dumb arguments against Biden? I hear a lot of people on the right say that Biden is a communist. Biden is by no means a communist. I believe he is a state capitalist. He is a kind of like a corporatist, somebody who's he's a friend of Wall Street. He's a friend of big business. He's kind of a little bit more business as usual in Washington, kind of a big government. But by no means is he an actual communist. He is not pro Medicaid for all. He is not pro free college. He is not pro, all of the things that maybe a Bernie Sanders would be for. And even Bernie Sanders isn't a full communist. I think that's kind of a misconception. But maybe that'll be a later episode. I think it's good to understand what words mean. And Biden is not a communist. He's surrounded by a lot of people that are a little bit more radical on the left, but he himself, his track record has been kind of right down the middle. Like, honestly, if you switch the R's and the D's on these guys' names, you wouldn't be surprised, because their histories and their records are kind of similar, middle of the road-ish, even though their rhetoric may not be. So even though Biden does want to expand background checks for guns, I hear again from the right that Biden's going to, or at least the Biden administration is going to confiscate guns, take guns, or do mandatory gun buybacks. That was something Beto O'Rourke, who was a Democratic presidential candidate in the primaries, that's something that he pushed. Biden is not for that. He's repeatedly said that it would be stupid to try to take guns, and that no one is trying to take your guns. I do believe him. That is not a major agenda piece, because one, it's really unpopular, and he's a politician. He's not going to do anything that's insanely unpopular that's going to jeopardize his approval ratings and his support. Secondly, it is a dumb idea to put forth gun control legislation aside from background checks. There's actually even a fair amount of Republicans that support background checks. So I think it's a dumb argument to say Biden's going to take guns. I don't think that's the case. I think Biden's fairly moderate. I don't think he's this uber progressive socialist communist person. There's been kind of this argument that Biden is pro Antifa. And again, I think this is a dumb argument because it's on the level of Trump supports like white nationalist groups. I think that's a dumb argument. I don't see it. I think there are white nationalist groups that support Trump, but I don't think that kind of like Antifa supports Biden. I don't think it goes both ways. I really don't. I think if you look at things that they've said, the lack of actual policy initiatives that are explicitly pro these groups, I think it's a dumb argument. I think it's kind of just rhetorical, and I think it's kind of hyperbolic, and it's meant to be hyper politicized and to kind of touch on some real hot button words. So I don't think Biden is pro-Antifa. He's said several times that he's not pro-Antifa. Trump tried to make a big deal about that at the debates, and Biden said Antifa is an idea or something dumb. It's a way of him dodging and not, attacking any of his supporters. Again, he's a politician. He's not going to stand for anything if it's going to get him in trouble. He wants to look like he's the friend of the left, the very far left. Without actually being one. I think it's a dumb argument. I think failing to realize that Joe Biden is a savvy politician. He's been in government for 47, going on 48 years. How could he not be a savvy politician? This guy's slipperier than you could possibly imagine. So I think accrediting him with this persona of being this far leftist, communist, uber progressive person, I think it's just not true. It's kind of just a tribute attribution of the more radical elements of the left to Joe Biden to kind of discredit him in a way. There's plenty of things to dislike about Joe Biden, but I think that's an unfair criticism. And it kind of goes along this line. Biden hates America because he's pro all these other things. And so it's basically the attempt by the right to make Joe Biden... I think there's too many similarities between Trump and Biden, so people make things up. So the left calls Trump this racist, anti-immigration, all these other things. Yeah, hates poor people, hates whatever. And then Biden is, he's this pro-Antifa, hates America, wants socialism and communism and all these things. And it's like, it's all rhetorical and it's hyperbolic. And it kind of doesn't, they're kind of just empty, trigger words that people have. And they're effective. That's why people use them. But I think they're just kind of intellectually dumb arguments. Again, because there's plenty of things to dislike about both of these candidates. So let's talk about some of the similarities. The border wall, actually. Biden voted in favor several times during his Senate career for a border wall. Trump also is for a border wall. And he's actually appropriated several $1 billion to build the wall. Even though he's only built a couple miles of it, it still seems to be something he talks about. And Biden has supported that in the past, even as recently as the Obama administration. Obama also supported a wall as well. Deportations, talking about immigration still. Both of their, Trump, both rhetorically and, in practice, does support deportations and family separations. And I think the story came out about like forced hysterectomies, which is horrible. But if that story is actually true, it was going on under Obama and Biden and Trump. And it was kind of just this procedural thing that we've been doing for forever. And it's just now coming out, which is a good thing. But it's also a little disingenuous to pin everything on Trump. Obviously, he deserves the blame. But, if both of the guys that are running for president had a hand in it, I think it's not a good case for either one of them. So immigration, their records are fairly similar. Biden is saying different things this time around, but his actual voting record is, he should be in agreement with Trump. So we're not really getting too much different with immigration policy. They're both Keynesian. They both are subscribers to Keynesian economics, as in the general theory, no pun intended, is that CIG gets to Y, as in, consumer spending, investment, and government spending all get to the total GDP of the economy. And as long as that GDP number stays high, it doesn't really matter what the composition is, the economy is good. So anytime that the GDP dips or, you just want to bump up the GDP, government spending is an easy way to stimulate the economy. And really kind of the structure of production or capital allocation doesn't matter too much as long as just the nominal number goes up. So that's been kind of a pretty standard, Nixon said, we are all Keynesians now. They're both Keynesian economists, which means that, again, why they're fighting for who's going to have the biggest bailout post-election. Both of them are just saying, oh, no, I'm going to have a bigger bailout. No, I'm going to have a bigger bailout. You're being stingy. You only want, you only want $1,200 checks. I want $2,400 checks. It's just kind of silly stuff. They both agree in principle on the Keynesian economics. I think they're both sort of similar on war, even though I will give a slight advantage to Trump. Trump has actually avoided some conflicts, but I feel like he's just extremely reckless. So I think it's more luck than anything. Like he's got like some good gut instincts as far as like avoidance of war, but then again, he just does insanely reckless things, and there's 15,000 more troops deployed around the world than there was when he took office. So it's not like he's pulling any troops out. He says he is, just like Obama said he was, never did. Trump said he would, but never did. He hasn't really started any new wars besides Yemen, even though that was sort of carried in. It started in 2015. So war, slight edge to Trump, just because he was able to make friends with Kim Jong Un in North Korea, which was something that Obama was not able to do, and I think he was criticized about that recently, which I thought was kind of insane. A crazy guy with a nuclear weapon, you kind of want him at least not angry at you, because he's kind of a crazy person. So I actually give that one to Trump. That was a fairly decent maneuver. Contrast that with, but again, he's not good on war. He hasn't really brought any troops home, and he's kind of just aggressive and unpredictable. So I think it's more luck again. I think that another 4 more years of Trump, we will start another war. It'll be on accident and ill prepared, but I think we will. Joe Biden has never seen a war he doesn't like. He's voted for every single military intervention in the last 40 years since he's been in power. So I will guarantee you, if Biden gets elected, we will start, if not, multiple wars, we'll at least start one. And of course, it'll be under the guise of humanitarianism or fighting this or that or interest of our allies or whatever excuse that traditional politicians use to cover up for their interventionism and empire building. So war, slight edge to Trump, but I think it's more of an accident than anything. Bailouts. They both agree on bailouts. There's no difference between them. They're 100%. We need to bail out all failing industries if they misallocated resources or if they mishandled resources or if they're doing a bad job and they're going bankrupt. We need to bail them out because, I don't know, Keynesianism, I guess. Health insurance. So Trump came into office and the Republicans came in 2016. Repeal and replace is what they wanted to do. As in reference to the Affordable Care Act that Obama and the Democrats passed. The interesting thing here is the repeal and replace, really, the Republican proposals were just Obamacare with Republicans' names on them. So Trump was like, oh yeah, I just want my name on this, right? They just want to take credit for the thing Obama already did. So they agree on, single-payer option healthcare. And so does Joe Biden. Joe Biden just wants to keep the Affordable Care Act and build on that. It's right off his website as well. So there's no difference whatsoever just in healthcare reform. They both want the same exact thing. They just want their names on it. Again, Joe Biden is not a total single-payer Medicare for all. Neither is Trump. But Trump is not a free market healthcare guy. And again, neither is Biden. Their plans are exactly the same for healthcare. They just, again, both want their names on them, and it just so happens that Joe Biden's name is already on the Affordable Care Act through virtue of being Obama's vice president, and Trump doesn't have his name on it, and that's what he wants. So, again, no difference there. They both agree on energy subsidies. They just differ on which ones they want to subsidize. Trump, again, we touched on this, wants to subsidize oil and fracking, whereas Biden wants to subsidize, green energies like wind and solar. Again, they're both subsidies and they're both picking winners and losers, but it's just, one has a favorite horse in the race. Interestingly enough, even though Trump seems to be rhetorically more in favor of trade wars and protectionist tariffs, the Obama administration was actually had used Trump's tariffs are bigger, but Obama and Biden used them more often. There were more tariffs and protectionist tariffs and sanctions levied on countries than under Trump, but Trump's have a bigger price tag. So I mean, they agree on a lot of the big stuff. They don't have a great plan for helping some of the civil unrest that's going on right now. They don't have great plans to address COVID. They don't have great plans to help minority communities. Interestingly enough, so Biden has on his page, he's got a plan for every single market segmented subgroup you could possibly imagine, down to He's got the Hispanic community, he's got the Asian American community, he's got the Catholic community, he's got the LGBT community, he's got the African American community, he's got the Cuban community, it's just insane. It's just like you have all of these different plans for all of these different people, and none of them are substantive. There's no substance to any of them. They're just platitudes and kind of just, again, being a politician. I'm thinking about you. I have a plan for all of this stuff. There's no actual plan. So it's a lot of the serious domestic issues that we actually have going on, especially in minority communities, and neither one really has a significant way of dealing with that. So, what are my predictions? I think that regardless of who wins, I think COVID is a non-issue by summer 2021. I think we will have a new war by 2022, regardless of who wins. I think there will be a significant economic depression in 2021. And I do think, and these are regardless of who wins, I think there's going to be a little bit more civil unrest. I think there's a lot of anger and frustration. And I think the fact that there's so much power centralized in Washington makes us, we have to fight. We have to fight each other just to do some basic things. Like, for example, the federal government controls education, right? So Trump's talking about completely opening up schools instead of letting it, to the community, whereas Biden wants to keep them all closed. Trump wants to completely control and change the curriculum because, in his mind, you need to instill patriotism in kids. And it's weird to me because conservatives generally, historically, they opposed the Department of Education, and generally don't like the government telling their kids, basically taking, ownership, as in ownership of their education of their children. But if it's something they like, they kind of want to impose on everyone. So you actually have conservatives that are supporting like a mandated national curriculum, whereas under Obama, they opposed that because they didn't like what was in it. Now Trump wants to do this patriotic nationalism type curriculum, and they're all for that. It's just a really dangerous precedent to set because all of these things, they touch everyone's lives, and yet we have to go to Washington and fight each other in order to have our kids taught the way that we want them to. And so those types of things are going to make just interacting with each other so much worse, and we're going to be so much more polarized. And I think we're kind of entering into this era. Again, it doesn't matter who wins. We're entering into this era where we're just going to be fighting each other over everything because all of the power is in Washington, and if our guy's not in power, then we are being oppressed, right? And I mean that mostly psychologically, but then also in having a one-size-fits-all policy, teaching your kids exactly how to behave and what to think, it's a little bit oppressive. I think that's just kind of going to get worse. It's going to accelerate. I think that's unfortunate. Now, as far as who wins, that's a tough one. I think Biden is leading significantly right now, but I think his lead is, especially as of late, closing very, very quickly. I'm going to go out on a limb. I think Trump might actually get this second term. I do. That is like the slimmest of margins. But I think it may actually just happen. Not that I'm excited about that, because there's plenty to be nervous about if Trump wins. And there's plenty to be nervous about if Biden wins, I think. But again, it really doesn't matter because all of the things the big things, talking about war, talking about depression, recession, talking about COVID, talking about civil unrest, those things are going to happen regardless. And I think the biggest one that is going to set all of this stuff off is going to be the economic depression in 2021. And the reason why I know that's going to happen is because it's a series of bubbles that we've had in the economy since the late 1990s. That one got blown up into the housing crisis of '08, and then we've been blowing up a nice sized bubble ever since then, and it's starting to crack. So again, it doesn't matter. It's too late at this point. It doesn't matter who gets elected. They're not going to be able to prevent that or fix it. It's going to pop, and I think the only concern here that I have, because I think that's the biggest one. That's going to set off the civil unrest or exacerbate it. That's going to set off the war, because usually when countries go through a really difficult time, civil unrest and economic depression, they go to war because it kind of helps consolidate the population. So I think it's going to be a chain of events. It's going to be a rough couple of years, regardless of who gets it. I think the after effects of this next, presidency, but not due to the president, but just that time frame, will really kind of shape the direction that we go to. Because one, if Trump is actually reelected, and the recession happens, and a war starts, and all these things happen, you're going to have. The U.S. is not a free market right now, nowhere close. But people think it is. People think it's a capitalist country. And the problem is that's going to get the blame. And if Trump is president, that is going to get the blame. And people are going to be so sick and tired of what's going on that they're going to want something else. And they're going to be willing to try something very radical and very different. And I think that's dangerous, because if Trump gets the blame for all of the things, then they're going to go very far to the left, which could be very bad. That would be actual, not the the Biden communism, because it's not real. But I'm talking about actual government ownership of the means of production. I'm talking about kind of an empire, and I'm talking about just kind of not good things. Now, if Biden wins and he gets the blame for all of this, I think then we swing even farther to the right nationalist, even worse than Trump. So I think that we're going to swing very far, but depending on who wins this election, it's going to tell us what direction we're going to swing. And the far left is very dangerous. The far right nationalist is also very dangerous. And so I'm not feeling too optimistic about this particular election. So I don't really have a dog in the fight. That is a really bad reference. I don't have a horse that I'm betting on or hoping to win. But I think the only thing that can keep all of these bad things from happening is education, trying to get issues, trying to talk about issues. Again, that's why I have this podcast. I'm going to dive straight into teaching historical lessons, talking about economics, giving you the tools to think critically and to not fall for a lot of the propaganda that's out there, and to not fall for a lot of the political talking points and the politicization of issues. Because I think that politicians will not save the United States. I think the citizens, the educated citizens, will. And I think if we can withstand a lot of this polarization and irrationality, I think that's the only chance we have. Because it's not going to be politicians that save us. It's not going to be the president, no matter who it is. It's going to be people. It's going to be people listening, people looking for an alternative, people looking to kind of take care of their local communities. We need to decentralize a little bit. We can't be looking to Washington to solve all the problems, and we can't be looking to Washington as a tool to control our neighbors and impose our will on other people. And I think if we can accomplish that over the next couple of years, we actually have a fighting chance. And that is my whole goal, and I hope that is yours too. And thank you for listening to my pre-election rant. I will be doing an episode afterwards, a recap with some further thoughts. We'll see if I'm right. And we'll see how everything is playing out. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, this has been the Take on Everything. And I'm your host, James Cook. And if you want to support the show, I actually added a support the show tab on the website, thetakeoneverything.com. And right now, I still only have the one sponsor, Liberty Classroom, but you can go there, click on the link. It'll take you there under my affiliate link, and you can check it out and see what kind of courses they have. They're awesome. You learn about history, political theory, law, economics, taught by PhD professors, renowned authors. These guys are top notch. I love it. I use it all the time. It's actually fantastic. So yeah, check it out. And if you decide to buy it, use my link because I got a little bit of a kickback. And I should be adding some more sponsors here in the next couple weeks. We'll get this whole thing kicked off so it'll be a little more self-sustained. All right, guys. Till next week.